Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's episode of In Focus. Suddenly, the situation on the Korean Peninsula appears much brighter, with the two Koreas back on talking terms with each other through a working-level discussion of a reunion event for the families separated by the ceasefire line. Let's find out how the two Koreas progressed from heated exchanges of accusations to such gestures of reconciliation and discuss how the situation could develop. Join us as we consult our experts after the newsreel.
The first positive sign for the inter-Korean relationship came on the 7th of September with the North Korean government releasing the crew of the Daesung detained for illegally crossing its border. Then followed North Korea's aid request, a positive response to South Korea's earlier offer, which set the ball rolling for a 10 billion won aid package, including rice and cement, to the north. North Korea also extended the ultimate gesture of reconciliation by proposing a reunion event for the families separated by the Korean division, and working-level talks were held in Daesung on the 17th to work out the details. Military working-level talks have also been suggested by North Korea to discuss the conflict surrounding the Northern Limit Line and propaganda leaflets. It is still uncertain whether these developments will have further implications in the region. South Korea is maintaining its position on the Cheonan incident and still wants to see concrete actions in denuclearization from the north before the six-party talks can resume.
Welcome back. We have two experts in the studio to discuss the recent developments on the Korean Peninsula. To my right is Professor Phillip Park. Professor Park is from the Institute of Far Eastern Studies at Kyungnam University. Thank you for making time for our show today, Professor Park.
Thank you.
And to my left is Professor Bryan Myers. Professor Myers is Dean of the Department of International Studies at Dongseo University. It's really good to have you here again.
It's great to be here again.
Professor Myers, as seen in the newsreel, North Korea has been making a string of reconciliatory gestures. It proposed a reunion of separated families during the Korean War, and it released 7 South Korean fishermen that it detained about a month ago. And it also proposed high-level military talks with South Korea. I think this is a significant change of attitudes because in May this year, North Koreans were threatening all-out war with South Korea. So let's start with the motives for the change in their attitude. Professor Myers, what could have motivated their change in the attitudes?
I think in order to answer that question, you have to ask whether it really is a change in attitudes. I think Professor Park will agree with me that every year you tend to get the same questions as a North Korea watcher. And last year, at about this time, Bill Clinton had freed the 2 American journalists. The North Koreans had sent a delegation to the late President Kim Dae-jung's funeral. And everybody was saying the same thing. Are we seeing a big thaw in inter-Korean relations? Are the six-party talks going to get underway? And then 6 months later, the Cheonan was sunk. And so that wasn't really a real thaw then, and I don't think this is a real thaw now. What we are seeing is really a very predictable station in the usual cycle of heightening the tension and then relaxing the tension. This is simply the way the North Koreans do diplomatic business. So I wouldn't attribute much more to it than that. If anything, perhaps the floods that took place in North Korea recently have lent a sense of urgency to the North Koreans in their need for aid, and that might have had something to do with it. But more than that, I don't think it represents any significant shift in attitudes.
So they look reconciliatory, but their motive is to sort of improve the anti-North Korean sentiments and to lay the groundwork for resumption of the six-party talk. Their ultimate motive is to lay the foundation for the resumption of the six-party talk.
I think,
can we say?
Yes, I think the moderator's point is quite well taken. I think it's true that, as Professor Meyer pointed out, that it's not really a thaw in relation between North and South Korea, but it might be more of a cycle that there's tension and lessening of tension. But I have to think that this time is a little different because North Korea, well, if you look at the North Korean motivation, with all the things going on in North Korea, like Labor Party's representative meetings, and they declared that 2012 they will open door for a strong and prosperous nation. Now, if you look at that as if you took that as propaganda,
then it might be Professor Myers is perfectly true. But if there's any a kernel of truth in it, or if they are serious about that, then I think there is we can see some other motivation. As you mentioned, that resuming six-party talk is very important, not only because they want to resolve the nuclear crisis, but the ultimate goal is to have a normalizing relation with the United States and the rest of the world.
Let's talk about the reunion of separate families. Working level talks on reunion of families took place on the 17th. And South Korean position with regard to reunion of separate families, that we have to institutionalize these events. We have to hold these events on a regular basis. Do you think North Koreans would accept South Korean suggestions?
Well, it's certainly, I think, a reasonable proposal in view of the fact that these people are dying. The people who actually qualify for these reunions are dying off, and I think there's really no overestimating the sort of psychological really torture that they go through waiting to hear if there's going to be reunions. But I don't think North Korea will ever agree to them being institutionalized, because these reunions are too important as a political tool with which to manipulate South Korean public opinion, with which to put pressure on the South Korean government. And in any case, even if they were institutionalized on paper, I don't think that agreement would be worth very much, because the North Koreans tend not to stick to agreements. Back in 2000, after the Pyongyang summit between Kim Dae-jung and Kim Jong-il, there was the general assumption that these reunions were going to be regular, routine things that would not be affected by fluctuations in inter-Korean tensions, and yet that didn't last very long.
So reunion of separate families is one of the best cards for North Korea to negotiate with South Korea. So if you
it really
institutionalize the events, they lose this card.
Right,
so
and
they
it also
would not
goes
agree on regularizing the events. That's your opinion.
It also goes against, I think, the political culture in North Korea, which likes to see every political decision as being something that resulted from Kim Jong-il's direct inspiration at a certain time. So we tend not to see these things being treated like that.
Okay, let's move on to the discussion of the military talks that North Koreans suggested. Previously, military talks between South Korea and North Korea failed to produce any substantial results. Do you think South Korea can gain anything from holding these military talks with South Korea at this particular time?
Well, it depends on what South Korea is seeking. If South Korea is seeking to resolve a nuclear crisis, I don't think that's going to be even an agenda in the working level military talk. North Korea, reliable source reported what North Korea wants from this working level military talk is resolving problems such as propaganda lifts that flowing to North Korea and the disputed water in the west, the Yellow Sea. So-called NLL. So these things are the things that they want to talk about. But as you know, that's been disputed between two Koreas. So it depends on what South Korea is looking for.
So if South Korea is looking for an opportunity or a venue for discussing such important issues as Cheonan instance or denuclearization of North Korea, it's not going to help.
I don't think that's even in the agenda for North Korea.
Okay.
So I'm not sure whether that's going to be on the table.
Okay. Many analysts are saying that China is the only country that has leverage over North Korea. Professor Myers, do you think China has played a certain role in inducing changes in North Korean attitudes this time?
That's always difficult to say. I would agree that China is perhaps the only country that has a certain leverage over North Korea, although some people are now saying that Russia has acquired a certain leverage by taking North Korea's side or by taking an ostentatiously neutral standpoint in the whole Cheonan discussion. But I don't think that China has the sort of influence that people in the outside world say that it has. North Korea really has no choice but to stay on this path of bellicosity and brinkmanship because its economy is in ruins. So really the only way the North Korean regime can maintain popular support is by ratcheting up tension with the outside world. So I don't think that China can really persuade North Korea fundamentally to make a big change in that kind of policy. But I can imagine that at certain times during the year, China can perhaps persuade the North Koreans that it's in their tactical interests to relax the tension a little bit.
Okay.
Let me add that to. I think it relates to the early discussion that the North Korea's motivation to have this kind of working level military talk. I think it is very important for us to understand that also the influence of China over North Korea. Yeah, I agree with Professor Meyer that China has limited power over North Korea. But I think the summit meeting between Hu Jintao and Kim Jong-il would take place at the end of August is very important. I think from the reliable source from the Beijing and Washington confirmed that, first of all, North Korea did not have interest returning to a six-party talk, but it's China that convinced or persuade North Korea to resume talk on six parties. Now, it is very important that the following events are quite important. For example, Wu Dawei went to actually dispatched to South Korea, Japan, and United States, and talk about resuming a six-party talk. And right after that, Stephen Bothworth are visiting these three countries. Now, what the content of their discussion is very important. That it is both countries, United States and China, agree that resuming six-party talk is important, and resolving nuclear crisis in the Korean Peninsula is an essential matter to be handled. Now, the China proposed that, which is agreed by by the United States, is that, and also convinced the North Korea, is that there's three stages of resuming a six-party talk. First, bilateral negotiation between or a meeting between United States and North Korea. Second, preparatory meeting to resuming a six-party talk, and then having a formal six-party talk. Now, this been defeated. It was agreed by the United States and China, but it was not quite welcomed in South Korea. So that's why I think Stephen Bothworth is again coming to South Korea. And I think it's quite important that what this meeting would take place, what they will talk about, and whether so that we can talk about whether the six-party talk can be really resumed.
Stephen Bosworth was actually in South Korea early this week, right? And he said, unless North Korea comes clean about the sinking of Cheonhanham, unless North Korea moves toward denuclearization, there's not going to be a six-party talk. But he also said that reunion of separate families is going to be a very, very important turning point to various pending issues on the Korean Peninsula. So despite the strong words of the United States, there is a speculation that the U.S. is ready to soften up on North Koreans and ready to resume the six-party talk. So what is the position of the United States about all these issues?
Well, I get the impression that the United States actually, like South Korea, perhaps might have felt that it overstated things a little bit after the sinking of the Cheonan. Naturally, that was seen as a very important issue to both countries. But you should never say never in international politics. And I think both the White House and the Blue House made a bit of a mistake in saying that they would never do this, never do that until the North Koreans apologize for the Cheonan. Because people are realizing we have a nuclear crisis here on the peninsula. And as important as those 46 sailors' lives were, we have a nuclear crisis which could potentially endanger human life on a much more massive scale. And we really need to be able to keep that door to dialogue open, regardless of whether or not the North Koreans come clean about the Cheonan. So I think the Americans and the South Koreans have been realizing this, and what you're seeing now is their desire to step down from that posture that they had earlier. So things like the family reunions are helpful to both the United States and South Korea because it gives them a chance to back down a bit without losing face.
Exactly right. I think Professor Meyer's point is very well taken. And if I add a little more, we have to understand the current Obama administration's policy, foreign policy, that is the strengthening the alliance. Now that's very important. That's why they would say something they should not have said. But so that's why there's a problem. And if you analyze the high officials of State Department, I think the puzzle became a little clear. The Undersecretary the Campbell said on the 9th of September at the CSIS meeting, he said that, well, in order to break from the stalemate between the United States and North Korea, it is essential to have conciliatory or peaceful relation between North and South Korea. So that actually tells the dilemma of the United States. So when you put that into the puzzle, I think that's why it is important to have separate family meetings and some efforts to thaw the current relation between North and South Korea.
So that's the American position. But what about South Korea's position? Because it seems to me that South Korea has been very receptive towards North Korea's gestures. It has actually reciprocated this gesture with its own reconciliatory decisions. It decided to send rice and cement and decided to lift the limits on personnel at Kaesong Industrial Complex. So can we say that South Korea is easing its policy toward North Korea? How can we explain the positive response of South Korea to North Korea's gestures?
Well, I think that President Lee might simply have realized that there's just not really much domestic political support for maintaining a very hardline posture towards North Korea. That point was made clear in the regional elections a few weeks after the sinking of the Cheonan. The government just published the full findings of the investigation in comic book form as well in order to appeal to young people. But let's face it, the South Korean public really wants to put the Cheonan behind it. And I think President Lee may well be realizing this, that it's in his interests to at least look as if he's very serious about improving relations between the two Koreas. Also, you have the farming provinces, which for quite some time now have been demanding a resumption of rice aid to North Korea for their own economic reasons. So I think a gesture like this is probably the sort of thing that President Lee wants to do, especially in the build-up to the G20, which South Korea, of course, wants to see going off without a hitch.
Professor Park, but these government officials of South Korea, sure, we are being very positive toward North Korea's gestures, but this does not mean a change of our North Korean policy. We will stand firm and we'll stay the course. So how can we make of these confusing statements and actions? I mean, the discrepancies between actions and words.
I think that's a very difficult question to answer. However, if you consider the statement from the Blue House, which came out 16th of September, they said they will not link a Cheonan incident to resolving nuclear crisis. So I think that's a positive development. I think it is very difficult for South Korea to make a Cheonan incident precondition to having a negotiation with North Korea. So in that perspective, I think although because of the past effort to resolving or effort to identify who the culprit of Cheonan incidents, South Korea put a lot of effort. However, it is very important that not only isolating North Korea would not be in line with South Korea's interest. So in that perspective, I think it's a good development.
I see. Professor Myers, you put yourself in the shoes of President Lee Myung-bak. You put yourself in the shoes of decision makers in South Korea. How would you go from here? How would you proceed from this stage?
Well, I think, generally speaking, I think President Lee has done a pretty good job in his North Korea policy. I particularly like what he said about the need to insist on principles in dealing with North Korea, the need to be firm with them. And I think he should have kept this more in mind after the sinking of the Cheonan, when emotions were running high, understandably enough. and certain very stern noises were made that were not carried through on. For example, there was talk of resuming the propaganda war along the DMZ, and that turned out really not to come to very much. And of course, there was certain linkage of the resumption of aid to the resolution of this Cheonan sinking as well. And we're seeing that is not happening either. And this kind of thing especially needs to be avoided when you're dealing with North Korea. If you look at North Korean propaganda, one of the things that they mock South Korea and the United States the most for is for talking big, but not actually carrying through on things. And I think this makes it all the more difficult for us to deal with North Korea in the future. When we say things, we really need them to know that we mean them. So that's one thing that I think I would change if I were President Lee.
But Professor Park, any final thoughts on how we should proceed from here?
Well, if we can learn anything from history, I think what Willy Brandt did, did 1960s and 70s is quite important. Willy Brandt have a new vision for German unification and peacefully resolving the Cold War order. So he gave up the Holstein Doctrine and also gave up the sovereignty of Berlin and put the so-called his policy, Ostpolitik, in place. So that, we have to understand that it wasn't go very smoothly in the first place. It was met by the quite hard resistance from the West German people, politicians, but he was insisting on the Ostpolitik. So by the end, that paved the way for the peaceful resolution of the German problem, and also the break the Cold War order. So, and finally unification. So I think we have to learn the lesson.
Well, I think we have learned a negative lesson in the sense that we had something like the Ostpolitik here on the peninsula. It was called the Sunshine Policy. And it really didn't work. And what we need to remember, for example, since we're talking about family reunions today, family reunions were going on between East and West Germany even before Willy Brandt began the Ostpolitik. The East German government was always ready to let its elderly citizens leave the country because it didn't want to pay, of course, for their welfare, for their upkeep, because they were no longer productive citizens. And the very fact that North Korea is holding on to these old people, not allowing them to come south, that shows me that we're dealing here with a very, very different kind of state. It's a much more difficult state to deal with, I think, than East Germany was. At least with the East Germans, you had a shared basis of humanitarian values, which you really don't have with North Korea. And I think that makes it more difficult.
So unless North Korea changes sincerely, there's not going to be much of a progress on the North Korea.
I really don't think so. I mean, there's very few concessions that we didn't actually try, or that South Korea did not try vis-a-vis North Korea during the Sunshine Policy. And we saw that very little trust was actually built. These family reunions were discontinued several times during the Sunshine Policy. So I don't think that's really the answer either.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is how we're going to wrap up today's discussion. Thank you very much for your productive discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is this latest gesture of reconciliation from North Korea the success of South Korean policy towards its communist twin? It is a hard call, and it is too early to say whether this could spell the beginning of genuine North Korean cooperation in more strategic areas such as the denuclearization and defense issues. We will just have to wait, and there will definitely be more developments ahead. This has been Kim Jae-chun for In Focus. Thank you for watching us.